The new volume you have coming out in a few weeks, is that another volume of poetry?
No, it has a few poems in it. It's a volume of essays. It includes the New York Times essay on speaking to white men. The premise of the book was really what happens when we talk about race? Why are we going off the rails? Why are we getting so upset? And the we includes me, like, what is this all about? So I had this thought when I taught Construction to Whiteness. A lot of my students went off and interviewed their roommates, their parents, their friends about what whiteness meant to them. And that class was more a class to create art. So people made films and books and things like that. And so I could try this. So that's what led me to talking to the white men. But then I began to think about, well, what about all these other conversations I have? Why am I saying the things that I'm saying? And why are these white people saying the things they're saying to me? And so whenever I didn't go looking for the conversation, I really don't think I did this consciously. If I did it unconsciously, I wasn't aware of it. But when a conversation would come up that really turned a question of how we perceive race in this country, I wrote it down. And then I hired a psychiatrist in town to talk to me about why I would have had the feelings, the thoughts that I had during the conversations and why I said some of the things that I said. And I incorporated that into the essay. And then I hired a fact checker. And he and I would go through all the implied facts. And those were also put on the side of the essay. So, sometimes it would be like that. I know why I said that, but actually the real fact is that it's this percent, not this percent. And so those corrections were made. And then there was a lawyer who looked through it, a sociologist who looked through it. And then I sent it back. So let's say one of those conversations occurred with you. I sent it to you. I said, I would say, Matt, this is the conversation I think we had. Do you think we had this conversation? Do you feel like you were represented correctly? Did you say the things I said you said? And some people said, yeah. Nobody said this was not the conversation. Everybody said, yes, this was the conversation. Yes, I said these things. A few people said, I didn't mean what you say I meant. I said it, but I didn't mean it the way you read it. And then I would say, well, do you want to write a response about what you were thinking and what you were intending to communicate? And if they said yes, that became an addition to the essay. So my piece would end and their response would happen. And so that's the sort of format of the book.
Yeah, that's a fascinating process. What do you know now that you didn't know going in?
Well, I think I learned a lot because of having to do the fact check. So they're actual facts. I didn't actually have.
Facts are a thing.
Facts are nice.
As a society, we're forgetting that rapidly. But yes, facts.
Yeah, but the facts are good. But I think in terms of the actual mechanics of having a conversation, one of the things I saw in myself was a kind of petulance that I needed to rein in. I think, a little bit committed to being right rather than engaging. And so I think what I learned over the course of taking these conversations apart is that being right is not that interesting. It's important, but it's not interesting. What's interesting is staying in the conversation and being open and seeing sort of where it can go if you give a little here and you give a little there, and trying to understand sort of what the other person's investment. And I think this wasn't a question I had for myself before. What is their investment in wanting to say this? Rather than, are they right? I know that's not right. But why should that then close down the conversation?
Right, let us understand each other.
Yeah, let's understand, let's figure out why you want it. Why do you want to keep going with that? And so that made me more curious in a way in terms of the conversation. Yeah, because I started asking myself, why do you have conversations? Why do we have them?
How did you choose your interlocutors?
I didn't choose them. That's what I mean. As far as I know, these moments happened with wild abandon and randomness. One of the pieces, the piece that I think most people in the press has referenced in the book, happened at Fairview. Because I'm one of the members of the Racial Imaginary Institute, where we think about race and think about the construction of race in this country, Fairview offered us tickets to come to see the play. And so we went. And then, as you know, at the end of the play, they asked the white people to get on stage. And one of our white members refused to get on stage. And suddenly I was just like, we are now part of the problem. The Racial Imaginary Institute is now the problem. So I was sitting in my seat becoming enraged at it. But I couldn't turn to her and say, get up and go on stage. But I was just waiting and waiting. And after a while, I couldn't even hear the play because I was just like, what is she doing? Why won't she go up there? What is going on? And so she never goes up. And the play ends. And I turn to her and I say, I didn't know you were Black. And then I leave, and that was it. That night we went, it was pouring rain. And that was the last thing we said to each other that night. And, this is a friend of mine, and this is somebody committed to conversations around race, teaches. And so I, over the course of the week, waited for her to say something. And she didn't. And then finally I said something, and then that's for example. And then she's one of the people who wrote a very long and detailed response as to why she did not go up.
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not you buy it, I find a lot of white people are like, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. What she says, so she's giving people an umbrella. But whether or not you buy it, it is a thoughtful response.
Uh-huh.
So that's what I mean. Like the moment, like I didn't know that was going to happen.
Right.
Another conversation happened randomly because we were at a dinner party and one writing a book on the election and insisted that the major factor in the election was economics and that he had run on economics. And I said, no, he ran on racism. And that turned into a big mess, that conversation.
Mm.
Such a big mess that I that's one of the ones where I didn't go back and ask for a response because we got to the point where John said to me, should we leave? So I didn't know when they were coming.
Right.
I was just having my life and then ba-bam.
Were most of the people grateful to you for the opportunity to come back and revisit these exchanges and to kind of think about them more deeply?
I think grateful is not the right word. I mean, I would say the New York Times piece has 3 different types of conversations in it. One of them is with a white man who comes to the edge of talking about race, but needs me to bring it there, and I refuse to bring it there, so we don't talk about it. The second one, the guy says to me, my kid wants to go to Yale, but some minority took his spot. And, and that's a typical performance of that kind of thing. But he was game to talk. He was like, yeah, let's talk. And the third one was a man who I'm sitting with in first class, and he's very nice and really is somebody who I thought if I knew this guy in my real life, he would be my friend. He was a perfectly amiable guy. And then as we were talking, and he says, I don't see color. And I'm like, what? What is that? And he's somebody who he and I have become friends. Because after that conversation, he looked me up, bought my books, called, emailed me. And when I finished writing that piece, I sent it to him because I didn't want our conversation to show up in the New York Times when we'd had such a nice conversation without letting him know. So I sent it to him and I said, I just want you to know that I did write our conversation, and here it is. And if there's anything you think I'm misrepresenting, let me know. And by the way, it's going to be in my book. So if you have a response, I would love to print that response. And he wrote a response that was really surprising to me. He said that he had actually told me things that weren't true, but that he didn't know why he had done it. And they were just innocent things like, growing up, race was never an issue. Nobody in my family is racist. The kind of racial strife that we're encountering now is not something I ever knew. You know, he said things like that. And then he said after going home and thinking about it, he realized all through high school, the boys were fighting each other and race was a real thing. But for some reason in his mind, he did not want to go there.
Right.
And since the protests, he's somebody who has written to me to say that he's a CEO of some corporation, and their corporation has done all the things everybody's done, given money to X, Y, and Z thing. But then they've gone further. They've had Friday lunch chats about racial issues, and he says he's going to continue them throughout the year, and they have done real substantive things. So that's one where he did come back and say, hey, yeah. it's deeper than I knew.
I'm curious how you would characterize your aims in a project like that. Is this book trying to accomplish something different from a book like Citizen? Or is it just similar work in a different register? Or how do you understand it? Because as you describe it, I mean, it sounds like it's more, I mean, it almost sounds like a step towards the kind of truth and reconciliation conversation that this country really needs. It sounds like it's a step towards actual healing almost, or could be. And I just wondered how you thought about that.
Well, I think one of the things that I learned, you asked me earlier what I learned in doing this. One of the things that I learned is that often when I'm speaking to somebody, as a Black person, my reality is not their reality. And that when they say, I don't know, they really don't. And that their inability to understand is not malicious. I think in a way, I was assuming that white people were like performing the stuff our president performs, where he knows, but he refuses to admit that he knows. And I think in what I gained from these conversations is a real sense that they don't know what redlining is. They don't know about the Tulsa riots. They don't know that Linda Fierstein, the woman who prosecuted the Central Park jogger case, lied about everything. They don't know. The fact that I follow that stuff and it imprints on me has nothing to do with my neighbor. They don't know. And so there is a real need for us to understand our lack of education. And, there's one conversation in the book that I have with an artist who is Cuban. And this also happened randomly. I was at a dinner party and I said something about somebody who is Hispanic that was sort of dismissal. It was a sort of a statement that, it was like a dinner party statement where you're like, well, the Hispanic community are the junior partners in white supremacy, something like that. And because of the ability to pass and I understand that the desire to assimilate inside a structure where you are no longer the target is something that is human. And as she began to ask me questions, I realized I don't know a lot of the stuff she knows. She was like, have you read this book? Do you know who this guy is? Did you do this? And I was like, no, I didn't. So it is that the book really asks us to kind of think about from where we are positioned and what we go into these conversations with and without. And that, I think, will allow us to be a little bit more open to where that other person is coming from.